Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 254 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, joined by my co-host, as always, Adnan Ikic at Say Which Way. Adnan, how are you doing as we enter in at last to week one?
Very pumped. We have some football back. It is officially week one right now. We have injury report out. We have the Thursday night game tomorrow night. Fantasy drafts, I'm assuming, have all been completed, and if not, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's Thursday night game tomorrow. But yeah, I'm very pumped, very excited. This is probably the most anticipated Falcons season we've had since at least 2018.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to get the ball rolling and to hopefully come out of Sunday with our first record above 500 since 2017.
Yeah, get those big dubs, hopefully. And joining us in excitement is Aaron Freeman at Falc Fans, host of Locked On Falcons, as well as a contributor with us over at the Falcoholic. Aaron, how are you doing as we get set here to finally start talking about real football?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Coming down with a little bit of a cold. Hopefully it clears up by the time we get to Sunday. But, I am not as down bad as the Carolina Panthers receiver core. So, I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. And joining us just in time for his intro, actually, it's perfect timing by Dave Choate here at the Falcoholic himself. Dave, how we doing?
Doing great. It's like 90 degrees here for no reason. I love it.
It was 95 here today. It was gross. Which is very bizarre because literally before I left to go to Atlanta for con, it was 65 and it was amazing. And then it was actually really cool in Atlanta too. It was in the upper 70s and low 80s the whole time. And now everywhere seems to be, just insanely hot. So
we're dropping to the 80s as our high for coming up in the next few days, and then down to the 70s. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah,
that's pumpkin spice weather.
Oh yeah. So, guys, we are here. We're finally to week one. The Falcons are playing real football on Sunday. We will be facing the Carolina Panthers in the first game of the season, first divisional game of the season, as well, with a chance for this team to finally get above 500 for the first time since 2017, and also the first opportunity for them to win a season opener, coincidentally, since 2017. So a lot riding on this game. There's also that other very fun stat that I think rookie first round quarterbacks or first overall picks or whatever it is are 13-1, in their first game going in. So, not a lot of positive stats going for the Panthers, but as we all know, the Falcons love to break streaks. Yeah.
Falcon, baby.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, which streak will get broken, because the Falcons are breaking some streak, one way or the other on Sunday, and that is definitely going to be one of our topics today. But I also want to just pick the brain and get everyone's thoughts on sort of how they feel about the team now that we finally made it to week one, the state of things. So we'll take care of that. We'll talk about today's injury report, the first official look we've gotten at the status of some of these players coming off injuries. Thankfully, it's a short list. And yeah, we will dive into this Panthers game as well. But yeah, let's kick it off, because I haven't, Aaron, you and I talked, I think, for our semi-final roster projections before the third preseason game, but not a ton of surprises really since then. We obviously had Isaiah Prince come in as the new swing tackle. But otherwise, stuff pretty much seems to have gone according to our plans. But how are you feeling sort of with the final state of the roster going into this week one matchup now?
Well, Kevin, no part of my plan had Parker Hesse getting cut and going on the practice squad. So I just want to make that clear.
That's true.
I got at least 2 good days of ranting content out of that on Locked On Falcons. So other than that, I felt pretty good about the Falcons' current state of the roster. I still have some concerns about, some spots. I'm not 100% sold on Trey Flowers as a fill-in starter at the cornerback position, but thankfully I don't think Carolina's the team that's going to really, make that look bad or anything. So for the most part, I think the Falcons are in a good spot going into the season. They're mostly healthy outside of that Jeff Okudah injury. We'll see what happens with, Cordero Patterson and Mike Hughes as the rest of the week unfolds. But for the most part, you like where they're at. I think, we're just waiting to see, the good players be good and some of the more questionable players, if they're going to step up. But I'm definitely looking forward to some of those good players like, Bijan Robinson, being good and making all my dreams come true.
Yeah. Yes, I think we're all looking forward to Bijan Robinson making our dreams come true. That is definitely one aspect of this offense that I'm excited to see. Dave, haven't gotten your take on the roster in a minute either. Curious if things sort of played out the way you thought they would, if there were any major surprises on your end to how this team sort of was when we talked to you last time, sort of training camp early in the preseason all the way to now. How do you feel about this roster going into week one?
Yeah, pretty good. Honestly, I think most of it played out the way we expected. It was a harder roster to make, I guess, but that meant there weren't a ton of surprises either, aside from, again, Parker Hesse and Timothy Horn. Those were both surprises to me. I was also surprised that Jovan Gwynn made the roster, actually. To me, I guess that's a really good sign for him that they're willing to hold a roster spot for him. They think he's worth having around in the here and now. Obviously, they like him long term, but that was really it for surprises. Though it's a much better roster than it probably was a year ago. I think everybody agrees with that, and we need a few things to break right. You need players, as Aaron alluded to. You need to see if Ritter can be all that you think he can be, if Mac Hollins is more than a guy who can make catches barefoot, etc. So, there is some variability here. There is some wondering, but I think this is a pretty good team on paper, and I'm looking forward to them stomping Carolina week one, statistical weirdness or not.
Yeah, some statistical weirdness is getting axed on Sunday. I just hope it's the one that we want. But, one way or another. Yeah, that would be a nice change. So they almost did it last year. They really should have. But we won't dwell on, that any longer because it's a new season here. But Adnan, just your thoughts here as well, because I think the last time we talked about it was before the third preseason game. So anything surprise you? Anything move the needle for you on this team, basically from the end of the preseason to now?
No, not real. Like, it was some minor moves. Like, yeah, I was kind of surprised that Timmy Horn got cut, although my guy Albert Huggins made it. Shout out Albert. And yeah, I wasn't expecting Parker Hesse to be cut. The other thing was I was expecting the team to carry a fourth running back, so I was a little surprised that Godwin Igwebuike got cut. Especially because, Cordero Patterson technically isn't a running back. He's now a joker. He's now the first team joker on the team. So, if we are going by that, the running back wide receiver hybrid, then you only have two pure running backs on the roster, and Bijan and Tyler Algier. But that's all very minor. Those are all very minor things. Like, it is what it is. It's not like there was this, earth-shattering, like, shocking move that they made. And, all of those guys that we mentioned, they're all on the practice squad. I doubt that it's the last we've seen of them. They may get elevated to the active roster at any point this season. We'll see them next year in training camp. And, one thing I did mention afterwards, it doesn't really matter like a lot, but it is nice to know that this practice squad is, I think, by far the best that this team has ever had, like without a doubt.
Yeah.
So it is nice having those, guys in there, practicing with the team throughout the season, and to have those options to where, if you do suffer an injury, which I mean is inevitable. Every single team is going to suffer injuries throughout the sport of football. You have some pretty reliable guys who can be elevated and who can fill those roles. Whereas, in years past, you had guys on the actual 53-man roster who absolutely didn't even deserve to be on an NFL team. But, that just goes to show you just how much deeper this team is at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you bring up Timmy Horn, who seemed to have won the nose tackle job, and I think he technically did, but they just decided seemingly that they're not really going to bother with keeping that nose tackle on the active roster, and it begs the question of like, oh, well, maybe they will sort of save him as a practice squad elevation, obviously for injury, but possibly also, if they know they're going up against a run-heavy opponent, maybe they activate him for that. But I think, Aaron, it was you talked about David Onyemata and his history as playing nose tackle, not necessarily like beefy 340-pound zero tech, but like one tech for the Saints. And do you basically think that in situations where we need that one tech, it's going to be David Onyemata out there doing that?
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. I also don't think you can put it past Grady Jarrett playing that role, because when they cut Anthony Rush last year, it was basically like the next 8 games where Grady Jarrett got the majority of those nose tackle snaps. And if you go back to Grady Jarrett's early career, he was supposed to be our version of Brandon Mebane, the old Seahawks nose tackle, and that's kind of where he played, especially even when we signed Dontari Poe, and Poe was more of the 3 tech and Grady was more of the 1 tech. So I think if the Falcons, push comes to shove, they have 2 players on their roster that can do that stuff. Maybe not 2 guys that you would say specialize in that stuff, like you would think a Timmy Horn or Eddie Goldman or somebody like that, could potentially do. But I think they'll have more than enough bodies there to get by in the meantime if they need to make a roster move further down the road to get more of that sort of true nose tackle, as you say, elevate a Timmy Horn. Maybe not this week against Carolina, but maybe it makes a little bit more sense next week against Green Bay, because you got to have somebody in the middle trying to stop AJ Dillon and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, Green Bay definitely would make sense. Carolina with Miles Sanders, just not as concerned about that.
I think Green Bay's wide receivers are all dealing with their own injuries from today's influence, so they go really run heavy. Yeah, no, it's been kind of wild to see that. That's definitely something we're going to get to later in the show as we look ahead to sort of the injury reports with these teams. But I wonder also if it's like on the topic of the run defense, it's like they have a guy like Calais Campbell who's so dominant as a run defender that maybe they feel like they can get away with not having that traditional like big zero tech nose. Like they just don't need it. Like they can go with the guys that are maybe more well-rounded penetrator types like an Onyemata, a Grady Jarrett in that role and be totally fine, because they know they can lean on a guy like Calais Campbell playing that maybe 3-4 defensive end, 5 tech sort of role and taking on 2 guys, and they don't really need the nose tackle to do that then. So I think having a guy that good definitely gives them some more flexibility with how they want to organize that defensive line. But you definitely like all the guys in that group, and Joe Gaziano, the Gaz, he made it as well. So shout out to my guy. Yep. But yeah, we did just have a question coming from Brandon with the $2. Thanks so much, Brandon, man. Appreciate you. He says, thoughts on some of the practice squad swaps that happened today with offensive lineman Barry Wesley getting cut and then bringing back safety Lucas Dennis. And I think, I'm trying to remember, was Lucas Dennis one of your guys, Aaron, or am I thinking of somebody else?
Yeah, Dennis was one of my guys, yeah.
Yeah, so are you excited that he's back in the fold now, officially? Or?
Yes. I am. I thought his defensive, other than DeMarco Hellams, I thought he was probably the most impressive backup for the defense. I thought Michael Abernathy did a lot of good work on special teams. And so I really like Dennis's coverage ability. And I think you want to have another guy like that in the event of, hopefully many weeks from now, months from now, if, Jesse Bates was to get nicked up, I think Richie Grant and Jalen Hawkins can do that job perfectly fine. But, I thought Dennis did a lot of good things in coverage to be more of that sort of center fielder type of player, which would allow players like Hawkins and Grant to be utilized, I think, in better ways, which is utilizing their versatility to line up in multiple places and having more of that. I'm not going to say Lucas Dennis is on the same level as Jesse Bates, but let's say a poor man's Jesse Bates sort of patrolling that deep half. And so having a player like that on your practice squad makes sense for the future, and then potentially, assuming that Bates is healthy and we don't have to worry about that this season, you can maybe develop that into the future moving forward.
Yeah, no, I like that idea. And, definitely a guy that I thought was going to make more noise in the preseason. He seemed like he got mostly stuck with the third, fourth string group in camp and then just didn't get a ton of opportunities. But I agree. He's sort of that guy if they're looking for another true center fielder type. He's really the one that I think makes the most sense out of this group that they have. Yeah. Well, I feel like Parker Hesse definitely deserves a mention, like you said, Aaron. And Dave, curious what you think, because I think that may have been the most surprising move of all was the release of Parker Hesse. He does return on the practice squad, but given everything Smith had said about him all offseason, about him being so integral to the offense that they basically had to play him in the preseason because they didn't have anybody else that could replicate what he did. Now he's not even on the roster. What do you think about Hesse winding up on the squad at this point, Dave?
I don't know. I kind of wonder if it'll end up being a short-term thing and he'll be elevated a couple times and wind up back on the roster. I can't see Arthur Smith quitting him. He's already lost one of the loves of his life in Felipe Franks, so it's going to be really hard for him, I think, to go without Hesse for multiple weeks. To me, even though he played a ton in preseason, like I kept saying, don't be ridiculous. They're not cutting Parker Hesse because, as you said, he was an integral player. They talked about him as though he was an integral player. So I think there's maybe a little bit of gamesmanship here, and we will see him back. I'm glad they were able to retain him because he still feels like an important player. But I guess good for John Fitzpatrick too. Maybe he's replacing Hesse in our hearts and minds, but I'll need to see it happen first.
Yeah. It's John Fitzpatrick seems to offer more as a receiver. Obviously, has the more prototypical size, but Hesse offered that versatility in the backfield and stuff like that we know they like. But again, they have a guy like Jonnu Smith that maybe can do some of that stuff. They have Michael Pruitt, maybe could do some of that stuff. So maybe that was what led to him being on the practice squad temporarily or otherwise. But again, just another example of guys that were sort of core players on this team that now have been relegated to the practice squad because of all the talent that's been brought in. So definitely interested to see how that plays out at that position. Let's go ahead and move on to the injury report because I know a lot of people are going to be wanting to know updates there. For those that haven't seen it yet, it's not a particularly long list for the Falcons, which is always nice. Pretty much always. Like no matter what, you always want the injury report to be as short as possible. But so far, the Falcons just have a couple guys on there, and then I'll go through the Panthers as well. We got 4 guys on the list for the Falcons on Wednesday. Running back / Joker, Cordarrelle Patterson, limited with a thigh injury. This is believed to be the same injury that kept him out of practice for the last few weeks of the preseason. Wide receiver Kaderil Hodge limited with the ankle. Cornerback Jeff Okudah still not participating with his ankle, though Arthur Smith did say that he was close and that he wasn't ruled out for week 1 yet. I tend to think he's probably not going to play this week, but I think week 2 is definitely in play. And then Jonnu Smith did not participate today, but that was supposed to be rest. And then notably, Mike Hughes does not have a designation. He was the other guy that had missed the last few weeks of the preseason. So just 4 guys on there. Nothing too scary at this stage. Obviously, we're hoping for the best for Okudah, and then hoping obviously that Patterson and Kaderil Hodge can be back for this week. But yeah, this is a good time to talk about that weird Joker thing, just because it's funny. And because I think it was definitely a topic of conversation. Adnan, I'm curious, do you think the Joker thing is just a bit, or do you think it signifies anything meaningful?
I mean, I think that this is, it's obviously a bit like, it's like it's a 12th man. Like they're not going to play 12 players, but if anything, this sort of goes back to Arthur Smith's entire philosophy of positionless football that he was telling us back during training camp. I think it seems like with the drafting of Bijan Robinson, they're finally going to start doing sort of what I was wanting them to do all of last year, and that's, let Cordarrelle Patterson just, be a Swiss Army knife on offense. And I think this is the signaling of that. Like it's not going to be, Cordero Patterson in the backfield taking a bunch of carries. We know that won't work out long term. He's broken down each of the last 2 years from having too many touches near the end of the season. He came out of Tennessee as a first-round wide receiver. He has played wide receiver extensively in his career. He revived his career and sort of had that career metamorphosis, renaissance, whatever word you want to use, in being changed over to the running back position. I think the Patriots did that first with him. So, shout out to Bill Belichick for that. And the Chicago Bears really took it to another level and Atlanta to a different level from there. But, it is nice. They're going to mix him up all over the place. They're going to line him up out wide. They're going to, have him in the backfield. They may have him in the backfield, with another running back, sometimes as well. So, it seems like they're going to utilize and try to maximize Cordero Patterson as much as possible to the best of his abilities, because I do think he is the best wide receiver among the 3 running backs on the team, specifically because he's played, wide receiver in the past. And we're going to see the bulk of the carries going to Bijan and to Tyler Algier, of course. However, Arthur Smith being Arthur Smith, it would not shock me at all if they put him in there at around the goal line, just to absolutely infuriate fantasy football players and Bijan Robinson owners. So I'm definitely, I definitely would not be shocked if that happened as well.
Oh yeah, big time touchdown vulture Cordero Patterson, which is probably in a weird way going to give all 3 Falcons running backs standalone value, just because it's there's a decent chance every single week that Patterson just scores a touchdown, and that makes him a startable flex basically. So kind of interesting. I wonder if he goes back to his first year in Atlanta where he had the wide receiver and running back tags, or maybe they have to make they just label him as a flex and he can just play anywhere. But that's basically what they're doing, so it's interesting. Anybody else have Cordero Patterson Joker takes before we move on to the other players on the injury report?
I have thoughts.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a bit, because it goes back to Arthur Smith and his continued needling, I guess you could say, of D-Led. And D-Led being the master of the depth charts. And I think on a presser last week, Arthur Smith, it was like, how do you have Cordero Patterson third string? And so I think he's just basically doing this as part of the continued, I wouldn't call it a war, because it's more playful between Arthur Smith and D-Led, going back to the, fine that he gave him on the opening day of training camp when D-Led, I guess, was still on vacation and all that stuff. So I think that's really where it comes from. But as Adnan said, I don't think this position switch, we should call it, to the Joker is, some new wrinkle that Arthur Smith is adding to the offense. We've seen Cordero Patterson line up at running back. We've seen him line up at wide receiver. We've seen him line up at tight end occasionally. I think you'll see him do more of that this year for all the reasons that Adnan said, just because, they have running backs, they have tight ends, they have wide receivers, but CP is that guy that they can move at multiple positions and find ways to utilize him in a variety of ways and really take advantage of that while you're focusing on Bijan or Pitts or London. You still got to worry about that playmaker that CP is, that he has been throughout these last 2 years when he has been healthy. But yeah, I think that's, the gist of it.
And who knows, maybe Arthur Smith goes out there and lines up at wide receiver. Did you see the video coming out of practice yesterday?
That was some inspired route running. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who do you think could win that matchup? Arthur Smith going up against the cornerback skills of Kyle Shanahan. He snagged that interception.
Kyle Shanahan did pick up the MVP that year. So
yeah, I don't know. That's tough. I mean, Arthur Smith's looks like he's got that veteran savvy to him, but I think Kyle Shanahan might be sneaky athletic. So I'm not really sure who's going to win that battle. That's a tough one. That's a tough one to pick.
I think Arthur Smith's best bet would be some yak right there. Maybe a short catch, and then I think he can run all over Kyle Shanahan. He seems to have a height and weight advantage there.
Yeah, he's got that big frame. You could probably truck Kyle Shanahan, who, a little more slim. So yeah, I think we had. Oh, go ahead, Dave. If you had a thought there as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think, to Aaron's point, it is definitely a bit, right? Like he wanted to. There's a couple coaches in the NFL who really just chafe at the depth chart thing. I think in general, like we saw all 4 Philly running backs listed as first string today. I think it was too. So,
Two Arizona quarterbacks.
Yeah. Well, you got to keep the competitive advantage there for Arizona. So.
Oh yeah. Great advantage.
It also does describe, it describes Patterson's role, right? Like they are going to use him in as many ways as possible, and they should. That's the best use for him at this point. If you can't give him bulk carries, or you're not going to use him as one of your top receivers all the time. So just getting him involved in a lot of different places, and it led to a day of fun memes and so forth. So it's a win-win in my book. If Arthur Smith wants to start screwing around with the depth chart and making up new positions and dropping guys up and down just to create controversy, I do support it. So if he's out there and hearing this, go nuts.
Go nuts. Yeah, no, I think Moonstar chimed in as well with the $5, saying that he agrees with Aaron that he thinks Coach Smith labeled him as the Joker just to mess with D-Led because they're back and forth. And he also enjoys Arthur Smith's sense of humor. I mean, it's fun, yeah. Like it. I hope things go well and we can continue to see fun Arthur Smith, because dejected Arthur Smith is a lot less fun. So. And just being dejected in general, for all of us, we can sympathize. Like it's just not very much fun. So, but yeah, Dave, sticking with you, any of the guys on the injury report that you have concern about? I mean, it seems like Patterson and Hodge are trending towards playing. Jonnu Smith's supposed to be just rest, but the big question mark seems to be Okudah. So how are you sort of feeling about the guys that are listed right now?
Yeah, I think, Okudah is the guy that you would love to see out there. Like I've been, hopeful that he'd be healthy for week 1, but it did always seem a little bit unlikely. So like you, I'm not expecting him to play this week. It'd be really nice to have him back a week from now against a Green Bay receiving core that actually is pretty banged up too. So the Falcons are catching some early luck here, but still, hopefully we'll see him soon. Obviously that's to me the biggest absence there, but everybody else seems to be trending to play, even if they're a little bit limited. So, no great concern there. I do hope that we can see Patterson out there in particular, but this is a fairly healthy team trending in the right direction against the team they should beat. So I have not a lot of complaints or worries, which is kind of new to me. I'm a little freaked out by it, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit dicey, but I think the line on this game of it's still -3.5 for the Falcons over the Panthers, I think sort of also, like, I think on paper, especially with the preseason the Panthers had, this was a game you'd probably expect to see a bigger line in, but I think like people just don't trust the Falcons to win this season opener because they haven't won one in like 5 years. So I think they're just like, oh, we don't really want to like bet on them doing it. Like they probably should, but we don't really want to bet on it. So I think this line should probably be a little bit bigger. So if you're the betting type, it's a good opportunity for you to probably get the Falcons at better odds than you would normally get. But it's always a little bit dicey in week 1 because week 1's also just prone to madness in general. So it could be literally anything can happen, and it wouldn't shock me. But they do need to win this game.
That's fair, but it's like. I think you have a point. You have a really good point that it really is just purely stigma at this point of it's the Atlanta Falcons. They've been losers for the past few years, and they have. But I mean, just looking at the circumstances surrounding this game, it's Bryce Young's first game. I know Bryce Young is he's great. He's the first overall pick, but it's his first game ever. He has a 4th-round rookie as his left guard in this game. The Panthers O-line's pretty mediocre as it is. Miles Sanders isn't him. Their wide receiver core is absolutely just in tatters right now. I think Jonathan Mingo's their only like healthy wide receiver at this point. Brian Burns may or may not play. Like this, I think it would be completely unacceptable for the Falcons to not win this game. I mean, even if Burns plays, like this feels like the most important home game or the most important season opener for the Falcons in a long time. And I know that, it's easy for us to go into every single year and saying, oh, this is the most important, season opener. But it legitimately feels like it, like this year. Because, all the hype, all the expectations surrounding this team, the team never being above 500 for 5 straight years. You're playing at home. You're playing an overmatched division rival. I know anything can happen, but it's like, if they lose this game, it'll almost feel like same old Falcons.
Mm-hmm.
It'll almost feel like, all right, like none of that like really mattered, all that hype, leading up to it. At the end of the day, it's just psychologically like we went out there and we fucked it up again when we, really should have won this game. So, it's just that mental hurdle of you have to finally get above 500 for once since 2017. Like it's been over 1,000 days since this team has been above 500. Like you have to take that step. You have to do that. And if you don't do it here, then all the pressure's on for that Packers game. Then after that Packers game, you have two of your toughest games, in my opinion, of the season with the Lions and the Jaguars on the road. So it can really get kind of nasty if you lose this game that you really, really need to win this week.
Yeah, this is a really important game, and for all the reasons you said, they need to find a way to win this game. Really important in like the win-loss record thing. Like, sure, I mean, it's a division game, so obviously it's important to get as many division W's as you can for tiebreaker purposes and for playoff purposes and all that. So it's important than most other games for that reason, but it's really a psychological necessity that they win this game, and we'll definitely continue to touch on that. I do want to get to the Panthers report real quick before we move on, because we've mentioned it. Panthers have 4 of their 6 receivers on this injury report. Wide receiver Amir Smith-Marset was listed as a full participant coming off his ankle injury, so he's probably going to play. Adam Thielen was a new addition to the injury report limited with a hamstring injury today. He's like their de facto wide receiver 1, basically. Wide receiver Terrace Marshall, limited with a back injury. We also have wide receiver DJ Shark, who is supposed to be their number 2, as a DNP still recovering from his hamstring injury, so his status seems to be in serious doubt. In addition to that, we had safety Sam Franklin Jr., who was limited with a knee. I think he's one of their like core special teams guys. And then defensive end Deshaun Williams, DNP with an illness. So, probably assuming he recovers, he'll be back in time for the game, but he is listed as a starter on their depth chart on the interior. So they're pretty banged up heading into week 1, and most of those injuries coming at wide receiver. This is a good for the Falcons to be down a corner. Maybe it won't matter so much if the Panthers are trotting out, Jonathan Mingo, a rookie wide receiver who I think we all liked, and like we're on the let's draft Jonathan Mingo train, but we liked him as like, maybe he can be our wide receiver 2 and sort of grow into that role, over the years, whereas the Panthers seem to be throwing him out there to be wide receiver 1 in his first NFL game. It's looking pretty desolate out there. Aaron, what do you think about the state of this Panthers receiving core? I mean, it looks pretty dire right now.
Yeah. I've heard Adam Thielen's probably going to play. I think it's a little bit more of a toss-up for Chark and Terrace Marshall. But, I think Adam Thielen's kind of washed at this point in his career. So, like, even if
Adam Thielen with a hamstring, I mean, what does that look like?
As someone who took Adam Thielen in fantasy football, no, he's not.
Okay. Good luck with that one, Adnan. They still have Laviska Shenault. And while normally I wouldn't be too worried about Laviska Shenault, I have seen Laviska Shenault take a screen pass and like 30 yards against the Falcons defense. So I will never put anything past the Falcons falconing, when it comes to this sort of thing. I think obviously this is a problem for Carolina. They already had a questionable wide receiver core. I'm sure, there's a Panthers podcast talking about the Falcons questionable wide receiver core, all that stuff and more. But it is a situation where like you're not really putting Bryce Young in a position to succeed, given what Adnan was talking about earlier. They already have some question marks on the offensive line. And I think when we talk about the matchup for the Falcons, like if the Falcons, if Desmond Ridder for once in his life will get off to a fast start in a football game, that would be nice to sort of put the Panthers on their heels a little bit. Falcons can kind of stop the run and just kind of make the Panthers a little bit more one-dimensional. Given their question marks on the offensive line, can they protect Bryce Young? Given the concerns at the wide receiver position, that's the scenario where I'm imagining where this game could really, really favor the Falcons. I think otherwise, like I do think that these two teams are relatively evenly matched. So, I'm not necessarily feeling the same way that you guys are, that, the Falcons should, maybe run away with this game in any sense. But it is one of those things where, like, I do think there is a scenario where this game breaks very favorably for the Atlanta Falcons. And a lot of it is, make Carolina throw the football, and then who are you throwing the football to because of all these injuries? It doesn't look good for Carolina. I don't know. I've seen the Carolina Panthers beat the Falcons by not refusing to throw the football with Chris Winkie in the lineup. I don't know if that formula will work just throwing nothing but screens to Laviska Shenault. So I'm crossing my fingers that is not a winning formula for the Carolina Panthers.
I mean, thankfully, Falcons killer Dante Foreman isn't on this team anymore, because he absolutely ran all over the Falcons in the last matchup.
Yeah, that was a bizarre decision on their part, because I can't be the only one that felt like Deontay Foreman was like better than Miles Sanders last year. And they just basically kicked Deontay Foreman out for Miles Sanders, who they paid a ton of money to. He got like one of the biggest running back contracts of the offseason, which, again, bizarre decision. But yeah, I mean, I also feel like with this Panthers team and this Frank Reich offense, it's really kind of in a uniquely bad situation, because Frank Reich likes to throw the football. Frank Reich, they got this young quarterback and they got these receivers, but it's like, well, the receivers are hurt, and the offensive line, which I think is the biggest point of concern here for the Panthers, the offensive line looked awful in the preseason. And we've seen that happen to the Falcons, and that translated to awful offensive line play for the Falcons in the regular season as well. And that was with a veteran in Matt Ryan, who basically had found a way to get around bad offensive line play. How well does Bryce Young handle it? And the other side of that coin is obviously the Falcons need to have a pass rush to take advantage of the Panthers' bad offensive line. But Dave, how do you feel about that matchup? We got all these new pieces in here. We got this new look defense. I don't think any of us are expecting a miraculous turnaround, but you got a Panthers team with maybe some wide receivers missing and an offensive line that really seems to be struggling to gel. Do you think this is an opportunity for the Falcons pass rush to start off the year with a bang?
Yes, which is why they won't do it. But
well, then last year, right? They had like 5 sacks in week 1 and didn't have any for like weeks after that.
That's true. I am probably, I found myself as a big time pessimist on a couple different shows over the last week about the Falcons pass rush. Relatively speaking, it's going to be better. The defense in general is going to be better. I'm not convinced it's going to be any great shakes. So I think this is the kind of matchup they should take full advantage of. I think they will take some advantage of it. I just don't expect it to be like a 5-6 sack game where they're like, squashing Bryce Young even shorter than he already is, that kind of thing. So I don't see that happening. What I do think is, what gives me so much optimism maybe for this game is Carolina's offense to me does not look like cohesive. It doesn't look like it fits together at this point with the injuries, with some of the new faces, with how difficult it is to get everything off the ground as a new coaching staff, with a rookie quarterback, with a rookie wide receiver in your starting lineup, with a rookie on your offensive line. So to me, Carolina's not in great shape offensively. And there's a creeping sense of dread as we keep saying these things because I haven't broken that habit yet. But this should be a matchup that definitely favors the Falcons. I do think the defense will show pretty well. I don't expect a dominant effort from the pass rush, but I don't think ultimately that's going to kill this team. I just think Carolina cannot do enough, assuming the Atlanta offense is up to snuff in this one, to win this game. So, again, creeping sense of dread, going to let it go. It's a new season. We got this.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big concern is, like, can the Falcons pass rush finish plays? You expect the Panthers to I mean, they should know, right? Like, they know who Ryan Nielsen is. He hasn't coordinated defense before this, like as the face of the defense. But if it's anything like New Orleans defenses, they're expecting a lot of blitzing. They're expecting a lot of 4-man, 4-2-5 looks and things like that. So they'll probably say we're going to try to run the ball with Miles Sanders, and then we're going to try to get rid of the ball quick to take advantage of these blitzes. And so I hope the Falcons, can find a way to neutralize what the Panthers are going to try to do to take advantage of their defensive tendencies. But, it is a rookie quarterback, so you got to think they want to rattle him. And if the receivers aren't up to snuff, maybe you feel like you can be more aggressive and get away with it because the receivers aren't necessarily going to be, I think you feel pretty good about AJ Terrell matched up against anybody the Panthers have to shut that guy down. So really it's whoever's starting opposite Terrell and, D. Alford in the slot. I feel pretty good against him, even against a healthy Adam Thielen at this stage of Thielen's career. So, and then you've got, this is our first chance to really see it. Like, we need to see this great safety blanket in Jesse Bates that can maybe open them up to be more aggressive up front, send those blitzes because you got Bates lurking behind to be able to erase any mistakes that might happen. So, I think this is a game that we definitely could see the Falcons defense take over. I also think it's really important for like what Aaron was saying, like this is a game where the Falcons need to start quickly because you need to get the Panthers on the back foot, allow your offense to be able to do what you want to do and not allow the Panthers on the same token to pin their ears back and try to get after you. Obviously, we don't know if Brian Burns is going to play. I mean, I would kind of be surprised if he didn't. I think they probably just need to get that deal done. But now that Bose has gotten paid, like is Burns like, okay, well now I really need to get paid or I'm not going because they just paid their guy. So what are you guys doing? I don't know. But, I think flipping over to the offensive side, the Falcons, like what Aaron was saying, I think it is really important to get off to that fast start, which obviously they will be trying to do. I believe they were one of the slowest starting offenses in the NFL last year. I think their first quarter like point differential was like the worst or one of the worst in the NFL. I think they were like minus 40 or something. So it was not a great setup last year based on the way this team was built to be losing the first quarter. So I think they need to make that more of an emphasis this year. But Adnan, do you think they got a chance to start fast in this game? I mean, the Carolina Panthers defense on paper at least still looks like it's pretty good.
Yeah. I don't see why not. I think they will try to go out there. It wouldn't even surprise me if the Falcons went out there and like decided to receive if they won the coin toss because they want the ball first, even though it is smarter analytically to kick the ball away. But that's another conversation entirely. I definitely think the Falcons are going to go out there. They're going to try to establish the run. They didn't really have a lot of success. They had no success actually in last year's matchup, second matchup against the Panthers, establishing the run because, but that game was super weird in the rain and in a torrential downpour on Thursday Night Football, and Marcus Mariota just couldn't do anything. But I definitely don't see why the Falcons, can't go out there and get off to a fast start. I'm sure that'll be emphasized by Arthur Smith. They're going to mix in a lot of play actions, especially early on in the game after establishing that run. And, I think they're in line with Aaron's mentality here of you want to get out to that lead and you want to make it difficult for the Panthers to establish their own run game. You want to make them more of a passing team. You want Bryce Young to drop back. You want those wide receivers to run routes with Jonathan Mingo being the only healthy one out there. And, this legitimately could come down to who gets off to a better start because you sort of will take away what the other team likes to do. Both of these teams really want to run the football. This could be a very, short game regarding, time-wise. It kicks off at 1 p.m., and this could be the first 1 p.m. game to finish because of how much that clock may be running. But, yeah, I definitely do hope that the Falcons go out there and, actually put up a first-quarter touchdown. Like, that's something that we didn't really see much of last year.
Yeah, I think that would be big for their chances in this game. And Aaron, kicked the same question to you. I mean, how do you feel about the Falcons matching up against Carolina's defense, which should be the strongest part of their team, I'm thinking. But I mean, I hear a lot of complaints from Panthers fans about how the defense looked in the preseason. I'm sure that we didn't see the starters that much, but how do you feel about that unit at this stage?
Well, I think if you're a Panthers fan, this is the thing you got to feel good about, right? Because you have a healthy JC Horn and you feel like, okay, this is exactly why we drafted JC Horn, 9th overall a couple of years ago to go up against a physical wide receiver like a Drake London. And so you're hoping that he can kind of neutralize that. And then, I guess you figure, Dante Jackson will just like annoy Mac Hollins. Like there's a big size disparity between those two guys, but like, I guess that works out, somehow in their favor. I'm not expecting, if I'm a Panthers fan, I wouldn't be too worried about Mac Hollins going off for like 8 catches and 120 yards in this game. That's basically what I'm saying. So, I feel like you feel pretty good about that. We've seen Brian Burns, have some dominant games against Caleb McGarry in the past in this Falcons offensive line. It hasn't been quite the same the last couple of years. That's owed to McGarry being a little bit better and maybe Burns not necessarily taking his game to the next level, which would allow the Panthers to back up the Brinks truck with, why they're hard negotiating with him. They're like, hey, maybe we need to see a little bit more to see if that, number switch to Agent Zero, boost those numbers a little bit so that we can pay you all the money. But I don't know. But like, I think other than that, Derek Brown terrorized the Falcons interior offensive line last year in the both of these matchups. You have a rookie starter at left guard for the Falcons that is, looked promising in the preseason, but didn't really get enough reps to really feel super confident about. So I think if you're the Panthers, and then you have like Shaq Thompson, who, is a good coverage linebacker. So, other teams might be, I'm not sitting here saying that Shaq Thompson's going to shut down Cordero Patterson or Bijan Robinson, but you don't feel like that is as unfavorable a matchup for you as it might be for, another team that has like Zach Cunningham or Paul Warlow starting for them at linebacker. Sorry for Paul Warlow catching strays. I know he's a friend of the show, but you know what I mean. So like, I think if you're a Panthers fan, you feel pretty good about a lot of these matchups. Justin Houston coming home to Georgia, maybe showing out for the home crowd, all that stuff. I know that's going to be personally devastating to Dave because he's been pining for Justin Houston to be an Atlanta Falcon for the last 12 years. So like, I think, not to sit here and say that the Panthers defense is going to shut down the Falcons, but going back to what Adnan said, like there is a real possibility that like the Falcons don't get off to the fast start because that Panthers defense does all of these things, checks all the boxes that they could possibly check. And then that allows Carolina's offense, if they get off to a relatively slow start, to kind of stay more in the game and be able to play the style of offense that they want to be, which, as Adnan said, Frank Reich, even though he has this reputation, he was a quarterback, but those Indianapolis Colts teams were primarily running teams. And you definitely don't want to start Bryce Young's career like Cam Newton's career started in Carolina, where he's throwing the ball 50 times in his NFL debut. You want to have him throw the ball like 20 times and be able to win that type of game. So I think that's going to be sort of the key matchup. Can the Falcons get off to a fast start against a pretty good Panthers defense that, relatively speaking, does have some favorable matchups against some of their key players? So like, I think that's going to be where it all matters. If the Falcons can kind of neutralize some of those key players, if Bijan can, cook Shaq Thompson like he cooked Troy Anderson in practice a couple of those times, that will be beneficial. If Mac Hollins can, sort of dunk on Dante Jackson on a couple of third downs to keep those drives alive. And then, of course, if the Falcons can convert in the red zone and, actually block Derek Brown for once, because, Arthur Smith, once we get inside the 10, he's going to run the football, right? He's going to take the ball out of Desmond Ritter's hands as much as possible. If he can run it in with CP, and CP is absolutely money inside the 10-yard line when it comes to running the football. So there's your touchdown vaulter. So I think there's ways where it could go either way for either team in this matchup. So I think that's going to be what the game kind of boils down to. Can the Falcons get off to a good start and their key pieces assert themselves, or does Carolina just have enough to sort of keep their offense in the game, and all of a sudden we're in the fourth quarter, 5 minutes left to go, and it's a Young Wei Koo, Eddie Pinheiro sort of battle. I feel pretty good about Koo in that situation, but who knows? Yeah,
it's tough. It's tough to predict, and like we said, week one is always just super wonky in general. I sort of feel like the Panthers sort of need their running game to take some of the load off of Bryce Young, and that's probably why they went out and gave Miles Sanders that contract. Now, I'm on record as saying that was a bad decision to get Miles Sanders to do that, because he was the most offensive line dependent running back in the NFL per many advanced stats. And it's a little bit weird, right? Because I think the Panthers offensive line to close out last year was actually like surprisingly good. Like they had started to really come together. Ikic had started to improve after sort of a lackluster start. But you fast forward to this offseason, Ikic seems to have taken a big step back. He was basically getting worked every single week in the preseason. Austin Corbett still out at right guard and will be for several more weeks. Bradley Bozeman really struggled. I know he missed time for them last year and came back, and he doesn't appear to be looking too hot. And then Brady Christensen has never been particularly good for them either. So you've got Taylor Moton, who's still good. Like, I mean, we all know Taylor Moton is good, but you've got a running back that you paid a ton of money to run behind your offensive line that's all of a sudden not as good as you hoped. And I just think that's a recipe for not good things. And you look at the Panthers running backs in the preseason in general, and again, this is the preseason, so whatever, but the only guy to average more than 4 yards a carry in a game was Spencer Brown, and that was in the final week of the preseason against the Jets, where the Panthers were shut out 27-0. They didn't crest 4 yards per carry with any of their other running backs, including when the starters played quite a bit in the second preseason game. Miles Sanders notably did not play. He missed most of the training camp of preseason with an injury, so that's something to monitor too. But I don't know. I personally I'm not afraid of Miles Sanders. Like, I don't know what you guys think about Miles Sanders. I've just been trashing the man. I'm sure he's very nice and but I just feel like he's just like super mid running back that they gave $6 million a year to. So yeah,
I feel the same way, Kevin. If you need assurances that you're not on a Miles Sanders trash island,
Good.
I don't think he's trash, but like,
no.
I do agree with you. Like he fit really well in Philadelphia, given their read option run game and arguably having a top 2 or 3 offensive line in football. I don't think that's really something that Carolina is going to do a ton of this year with Bryce Young. And
I hope
then,
not.
then the question marks that we've been talking about all night with the offensive line. So, I agree with you. Letting Dante Foreman walk for relative pities to Chicago or wherever he wound up didn't make a ton of sense. Plus, I'm also not a huge Chuba Hubbard fan either. So, like, it would have made, if you brought in Miles Sanders and kept Dante Foreman, we'd be having a very different conversation here. But like, to roll with Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard, it's like, okay, good luck with that.
Also does not catch the ball, which is bizarre. Like, I don't know why you'd go out and pay a guy to not be a 3-down running back, because he caught 20 passes last year, which not a small number of passes, but for 78 yards, which for the record is 3.9 yards per reception, that is the lowest yards per reception I've ever seen, to be completely honest. So not a receiver. And I believe they were talking in the offseason about how they wanted to get him more involved in the passing game. I'm like, I don't think that means what you think it means. I would not recommend that strategy, but always a guy that's averaged a healthy yards per carry on the ground, but it's been behind Philly's offensive line, who we know is the best. Maybe the Falcons will challenge this year for the best run blocking. I mean, I don't think they'll catch the Eagles in terms of pass blocking anytime soon, but I think that they went out and got that fit there, and they paid all that money because they knew that they needed to have a running game to lean on to take the pressure off of Young, and I just don't think that's going to happen. I'm also on record as thinking that the Falcons' run defense is going to be really good, so this maybe could be an opportunity where maybe it's not the pass rush that keeps the Panthers' offense in check. Maybe it's the run game, shuts down what they want to do on the ground, forces the Panthers to be one-dimensional, and maybe the pass defense isn't as good, but if they can hone in on the pass game, maybe that'll let them sort of neutralize a little bit better. But yeah, I just want to get Dave's thoughts on this as well. I mean, that Falcons matching up against the Panthers offense, Panthers matching up against the Falcons offense. Dave, any overall takeaways on how you feel like this one might go?
No, I mean, I think despite the uneven results a year ago, Carolina is a good defense. Obviously, there is tremendous talent at every level of that defense. between Shaq Thompson, between J.C. Horn, between Derek Brown, who haunts my nightmares personally after last year. So, it is a tricky matchup for them. And to circle back to something that Aaron mentioned earlier, the slow start is actually the thing I'm most worried about in this game, because I remember researching this earlier in the offseason and writing a little bit about it. But like, Desmond Ridder historically has started slow. It's just something that he does. And this offense started slow all last year. They were much, much worse in the first half than the second half. They were a below average offense in almost every metric in the first half of games, and they were an above average offense in the second half of every game. So to me, that's kind of the recipe for disaster here. Is you get off to a slow roll, you have a turnover, you have a couple of unproductive drives, the Panthers grind out some scores, and now you have to catch up. And like, on paper, this team should be able to do that. But Carolina does have a good defense, and you don't know how that's going to go. So that is really my biggest concern for this game, is that they will come out slow and flat, and not just because we're going to reignite the preseason starters debate, which I got sick of almost instantly, but because it might lead to poor results in the game. So I do think this offense is good enough to overcome Carolina, certainly. Like, they're not an elite defense, but I do worry about that combination, right? Like, defense is good enough. Falcons offense is a little slow. Maybe they're not quite good enough to slow down, 70 short passes to Miles Sanders, because that's specifically how they're going to go after the Falcons, of course. And we end up with a problem.
Yeah, no, that would not surprise me at all. And, I think last year you look at the Panthers, and I think they played the Falcons well, especially in that second game, which again was in a rainstorm. So, I mean, that's part of it, but sort of held Drake London in check, held Kyle Pitts in check. Well, I think Marcus Mariota more than anything held Kyle Pitts in check. I just looked at the numbers for that game. Kyle Pitts was targeted 8 times in that Panthers game and only had 2 catches. That second
and
Panthers
7
game.
passes were uncatchable.
One of them he caught somehow anyway. He leapt up into the air. But yeah, so it's not exactly a high bar to clear to beat Marcus Mariota, and I think that we'll see how the Falcons handle this. But also the Panthers don't have Deontay Foreman to run for 130 yards and a touchdown, in theory. So we did get one last donation here from Corey as we close things out with the $5. Thank you so much, Corey. He says, I ran the numbers, 42 sacks this year. I said it, put it on the board. I like that prediction, Corey. I tend to think it'll be more like 35. I think that's sort of where I'm landing, but I would love to get into the 40s. I can't remember the last time they had more than 40 sacks. There is an extra game, 2004. That's right. You looked into this. I feel like we had this discussion before, but yeah, I'm going to say 35. With a really good run defense. And I think that's probably good enough to get this team to be like an average defense this year, which would be a mammoth step from where they used to be. So definitely a step in the right direction.
I would sign up right now for 40 sacks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Instantly.
I would take 35. If I could guarantee 35 sacks today, I would say yes.
My unofficial prediction on Locked On Falcons was 37.
Okay, yeah, so we're all in like kind of the same-ish area there. All right, well let's do a fun unofficial score prediction, because we don't know the official injury report yet. But I'm curious where people's thoughts are. Dave, I'll let you take the first crack here. Where are you leaning on a score prediction for Sunday?
I'm gonna say 27-17 Falcons. So despite how gloomy I sounded at times, I'm realizing I do think the Falcons win this one and win it fairly handily. I just expect some early frustration. So
yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Aaron, what you got for Sunday?
I got a little closer. I think it's 23-20. I think it's going to come down to the final possession. I think every Falcon game is probably going to come down to the final possession, and it's just how this team is always going to be. Like, until we probably get to that Arizona game. Like, I don't know. Maybe Houston. We'll see how they look this year, but I don't know if there's going to be a game where, or let me say this, until the Falcons show me that they're this team, like, I don't know if there's going to be a team or a game where I feel like, oh, they're going to handily win this game. I think everything, we're going to still having heart palpitations with 5 minutes to go in the game. We might have a 2-score lead going into, it's the same old Falcons. I like, Arthur Smith, Bijan Robinson, all that stuff. You can change all you want, but it's still the same old Falcons. So I think it'll be a close game. We'll get some Young Wei Koo magic in the fourth quarter, 23-20.
Yeah. Well, as long as they win, I don't have a problem with that. Adnan, what are you thinking here?
I'm going to go 24-17 victory. I also think it'll be a back and forth game. Probably one of those where the Falcons tack on a field goal near the end to make it a 7-point game. Then Carolina has an opportunity with less than 2 minutes left. The Phillip Rivers special. You need to drive 80 yards. You have no timeouts. You need a touchdown. And we'll be nervous about it, but in the end, I think the defense will come away with a turnover on downs or something at that point. But yeah, I think it'll be close. Like Aaron said, this is one of those where, thinking in theory it should be a lot easier. The team probably will make it a lot more difficult than it should be. But at the end of the day, they'll pull it out. It'll be a massive psychological victory. They'll have a lot of momentum going into that Packers game. Shit, I think they'll win that Packers game too. My unofficial week 2 prediction. And
Right.
I think we'll be sitting here at 2-0, and just the world will be at our feet.
Yes, everyone will be very hyped for the Falcons if they start 2-0.
Everyone will be super excited. People will probably be in Dave's mentions talking about
Super Bowl. Yeah.
Talking about possible home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Maybe a bye week when we're at 2-0. But
Number one seed.
If they go 1-0, I'm just gonna say this: if they go 1-0, people will be doing that. If I say something mildly negative about the game, people will be like, "What's wrong with you, man? Super Bowl," because that's what it was like at least 5 or 6 times last year, and even in 2021. So yeah.
Dave's
And
just a hater.
Love every minute of it. Love every minute.
Certified hater. Yeah.
We're all just certified haters here, actually.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Just a lot of negativity on the show right now.
Yes. Well, I also had 24-17 is probably going to be what my prediction is. And same thoughts as to all you guys. I think that it's, part of me thinks that the Falcons will just sort of outplay the Panthers and the score will actually end up looking closer than the game actually was. But part of me thinks that it's going to come down to it, and then either the Panthers, are driving late and making us all sweat, or the Falcons sort of add some points at the end to give themselves a little bit of a cushion. But it's week 1, so it's I wouldn't predict anything more than a 1-score game for the Falcons, and I agree with what Aaron was saying. They got to show us that they can win by double digits before we start predicting it, because they didn't do it. What did they do it once last year? I think that was it. Otherwise, everything else was 1-score games. So, I think they're capable of it with this new weaponry and hopefully Desmond Ridder being better than Mariota. But I think we need to see it first. So for now, we're predicting 1-score victory margins or less. So, but I do think they pull it off as well. So, the Panthers, I think they have some. I don't think they should necessarily feel despondent about this game, they have no chance, because they do certainly have a chance. But I think if the Falcons come and play their game, I think they should win. So we'll see if they can do it. Now you just got to actually play the game and win it. We've got all the offseason prognosticating done. We've got all the moves, everything settled. Now you just got to come in and win the actual games that count. So excited to see it. Guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Before we take off, I want to remind you, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live if you want to support the show. Get those exclusive perks. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you're listening to that podcast audio later, leave us that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. If you're interested in supporting the show, you can also leave a tip at streamlabs.com/Falcoholic/tip. You can do those offline as well. We'll read them on the next show. And we are now officially into our in-season coverage schedule. So that'll start with a game preview on Friday. I'll be joined by Brian Beversluis from Cat Scratch Reader, old friend of the show, to do our first game preview of the year. We'll be talking with him about the Panthers. And then, of course, we'll have our post-game show on Sunday immediately following the game, where we can hopefully talk about that big dub and first winning record in God knows how long. So, guys, thanks again for tuning in. Before we take off, I want to thank our wonderful guests this evening. First of all, we have Aaron Freeman at FalcFans. He's the host of the Locked On Falcons podcast and a contributor of ours over at the Falcoholic. Aaron, anything you'd like to plug as we get set for the first game of the season?
I actually wrote something for Falcoholic this week, so it's going to be about the Falcons defensive line, going up against the offensive line, touching on some of the things that we talked about today, as well as, Ryan Nielsen attack aggressive thing. So look for that to drop at some point whenever Dave decides it's best for that to go out. And then I guess we're doing Name 5 Falcons again this year. So got to get that going for the weekend. Intriguing players to watch. And of course, check out Locked On Falcons. I think the crossover I did with the Locked On Panthers guys literally just dropped on YouTube as we're talking. So go check that out to get more insight into the Carolina Panthers. If today's Falcoholic Live was not enough for you, yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah, if you need more of that sweet content, definitely check out the Locked On Falcons podcast as well. Also with us, Dave Choate at the Falcoholic himself. Dave, anything you'd like to plug from our just overflowing content catalog as we get set for this Panthers game?
Well, Aaron's article, Friday morning, you should look for that. So
there you go.
I'm actually
Confirmation.
very excited about that. Good piece. But just, all of our coverage from the team, I can see the excitement. People are writing stuff like crazy. We're getting all amped up for the season here. So, stay tuned to the live show. Stay tuned to the site. We'll have a lot for you. It's not just me making fun of Jay Kaner for getting suspended 6 games for PEDs. We have a lot else going on. So looking forward to our first fun winning season in a long time. So definitely stay locked onto that.
Yes, we're going to keep, pushing those positive vibes out there for sure. Also want to thank my co-host Adnan Ikic at Say Which Way. Adnan, anything you'd like to let the people know about?
Yeah, so I am re-upping my article series looking at the series history and what if the Falcons win/lose. Those will both be getting submitted sometime today or tomorrow, Dave, and you can just schedule those up for whenever, whenever is best. And I also have a Michael Vick article that's going to be getting published tomorrow, talking about Michael Vick as a player from his playing days. So definitely check that one out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Check out all that great stuff, guys. I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic. Kevin, like I said, lots of shows coming up for you guys this week. I'll also be tracking our picks and our picks standings over at the site. Once again, I'll be handling our 5 questions series where we talk with the other team. I just got finished sending those back and forth with our Panthers correspondent. And I'll be having some other stuff for you guys throughout the weeks as well. So looking forward to that. And of course, looking forward to watching some Falcons football on Sunday that will hopefully be good and fill us with warm, positive feelings and not depression. If we could avoid the depression for 1 week this year, I'd really appreciate that. Falcons, can we please do that for the love of God? For the love of God, Falcons win. Thank you. Okay. I'm done. Yes. Guys, thank you again so much for tuning in tonight. We'll see you next time on the Falcoholic Live.